Nobody's in a better position to take advantage of the NCAA's new scholarship rules than Jedd Fisch.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Lars, we got a really fun show today. We're going to talk about some of the Huskies that unfortunately were snubbed from the all Big Ten preseason team that was voted on by USA Today. And we're going to talk about how these new scholarship rules might impact the 2025 class as well, because out of all the coaches in the country, with the way they like to recruit, with the way that things are going, it feels hard-pressed to find a coach that is in a better position to take advantage of these new scholarship limits, where now football teams, there are a bunch of other ones around different sports as well. We're talking football right now. Football teams are allowed to offer 105 scholarships to their players.
Yeah, it's a real, man, 2024-25 college football is just something different. It's incredible. And I do think there's a few caveats in here where you mentioned to me before the show that it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give 105 full ride scholarships, so you can do some partial scholarships. You can have, and I think the way that this can work out, especially for Jedd Fisch, is when you look at how they balance in-state recruiting with some, other guys that are on the other side of the country. Maybe there's a chance when you combine NIL as another factor, you could give a guy a half scholarship and get him the NIL on the back end, and then give a full scholarship to somebody else, and that's how you build your roster up. You have to basically view it in an NFL sense, where you have, do you want to draft the guy? Do you want to have him be an undrafted free agent? Is there a way to kind of negotiate that down? Because at the end of the day, you want to get the most amount of talent on your roster within the confines of what you can afford, and ideally most teams doing it the cheapest way. When we're talking about this in respect to college football, that doesn't mean you're going to go totally cheap, but I do think this opens up another path for some in-state guys that maybe you want to take a flyer on. So you can say, hey, when you have a scholarship, you can come in here, and if it doesn't work for your first couple of years, then you could transfer, but you'll at least be able to get some scholarships, whereas before it was, well, the only way you can come here now is if you walk on. Think of like a Caden Green, for example. Instead of giving him a walk-on spot, he's now getting a half scholarship. He's getting some things taken care of, and it doesn't preclude him from getting NIL money in the back end. Much like any rookie free agent can go do autograph signing over at some Alderwood Mall or whatever, and that's separate money from what they get from the team and the contract. So you just kind of have to understand this. There's so many moving parts to this. But I do think, as you said, Jedd is very well positioned. And I think the reason why I bring that NFL model to example is because Jedd Fisch would bring it to the table, because one of the main selling points of the program is, hey, we are building you for the pros. Okay, so here's how you understand balancing the books in the pros. Here's how you understand this is how money works in the NFL. And you have to kind of stagger that as you get older, because you're not going to get $10 million unless you're a first-round pick your rookie season. You have to kind of work up to it. So it does create some realistic expectations for guys down the road.
So I really like where you're going with that, because I had a completely different thought process with this, where when I thought about it strictly in terms of on the recruiting trail. And I have a lot of thoughts about 2025. We're going to get to those in a little bit. But I thought about this on the recruiting trail because now, as you said, there are a lot of ways you can go out there and offer half scholarships and everything. But Jedd, who is, he obviously, as he said, he's not anti-portal, but wants to build the roster in a different way and wants guys integrated in his system from day one. And what better way to do that than by taking a whole bunch of high schoolers like he's showing to be doing in the 2025 class. And I think that this does nothing but increase that model where, he said, 80-20 might be what we do with high school guys versus the transfer portal. Now I feel like it might be 85-15 or maybe even 90-10, where all of a sudden Now, as in ways you described, I'm sure there are a whole bunch of other ways that, some teams might have to be thinking of the strategizing behind closed doors right now that we're not even aware of. But I think with all the other ways that are out there for these teams to now bring guys onto rosters in different ways, Jedd is in a unique position to take advantage of that because we already see him doing that. We see him loading up this class with, some of these under the radar three-star talents when you think of, Dominic McCone, Desmond Roebuck, Victor Sanchez Hernandez, Lowen Coleman Brusa being a really great example there as well. When you think about a lot of those guys, now it becomes even easier for him to take that. And then for them to not preclude, I'm going out on a limb here, obviously, because he's committed to Alabama, but going out and still pushing for a Dijon Lee at that time before he committed, where we're certainly going to talk flips. I don't know if that would end up being a name that I would watch in any way, shape, or form, but it doesn't preclude you from taking a guy like that. It doesn't preclude you from taking, I'm going to give another name of a guy who's committed, but is somebody that still took an official after he committed, in Matai Tagoa'i. It doesn't preclude you from still pushing really hard for a take like that, because all of a sudden it doesn't matter because you have so many extra spots. You're not so much, under a crunch, if you will, of, we need to get to 85. We need to get to 85. No, now that it's 105, there's so much more wiggle room. And there's so many more ways that you can just find a way to fit guys under that cap.
Yeah, and in a way, as you were saying, again, maybe all great points there, but the one name that kept coming to mind for me was this creates more Thaddeus Dixons. And in that, when I say that, is you could also look at JUCO guys where they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily the new age portal, it's the old fashioned portal, if you will, where you say, hey, you know what, half scholarship takes care of your academics and you get the NIL on the back end, or 3/4 takes away whatever. But all you're doing is you're doing it for a year or two just to say, hey, you know what, I just want to get to the NFL. I put in my time in college and got my degree, or got my associates, or whatever you want to call it. But it does it that way. And again, to your point, it doesn't then preclude, okay, well, it's this guy or this guy. And I think about Tyrese Johnson, a walk-on who was committed to Air Force Academy, signed to Air Force Academy, and ends up walking on to Washington out of Colorado. Think about a guy like that, where he's got to pay out-of-state tuition. And, he's obviously had the chance to go to a different program, choosing not to go to that program after the fact. And so part of my thinking has to be with that. Okay, well, maybe I like the football future better at Washington. I just need to make sure that I don't have to take out, $100,000 in Pell Grant, loans or whatever to pay for my tuition on the front end, because all of this is supposed to benefit the prospective college athlete. Not student athlete, not this and that. These are college athletes. They're going to get paid one way or another. So it's, how do you reward them while also not completely just giving them the moon?
So we would be remiss if we didn't mention the name Drew Fowler in this segment, because if there's one person who you would hope that it can create more of, it's more Drew Fowler's. Because at the time of his commitment, he had offers from all over the place. He could have gone to UCLA. He could have gone to Louisville, to Utah on a scholarship, and he chose to walk on at Washington. And that's a guy who, up until this season, up until Jedd Fisch took over, he didn't have a scholarship. And Jedd did a fantastic thing, an amazing thing, by backdating his scholarship to last year to make sure that he got 2 full years of financial aid, and something certainly that Drew deserved. But now the hope is that maybe you can create some more guys like that, some more of those, hometown heroes, if you will, that still were, a 3-star prospect, a little bit underrated at the time, but still somebody who can now be rewarded from that, for, his loyalty, for all those sorts of things from day one, with a partial scholarship, with a half scholarship, whatever it is. And there's so many different ways that I feel that Jedd can find a way to take advantage of that. And yes, his NFL background, as you said, Lars, certainly is very helpful in that. And with that being said, this could certainly have a lot of impact on the 2025 class as well. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, which is great news for me because a good friend of mine and I, we're going to go watch the Mariners play the Phillies on August 3rd. Can't wait. And you know I'll be buying my tickets on the Game Time app because Game Time has so many fantastic offers like last minute deals where you can save up to 6% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. They got flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. They got all-in pricing where you toggle this feature. It's my personal favorite. Where you toggle this feature, it shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with the Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So Lars, this is going to have a lot of impact on the 2025 class, in my opinion, because something we have kind of hinted at on this show for weeks, and it's something we can't dive too far into it because we're not going to throw out names that we don't legitimately believe that the staff might still be interested in that are committed elsewhere. And, if guys end up at the lake, that's one thing, there's certainly some smoke there, but one name that I know I referenced in the first segment that would certainly fit that bill, since he did take an official while still committed to USC, is four-star linebacker Matai Tagoa'i, where, if some of these, since these rule changes, these scholarship rules are set to go into effect during the 2025-26 academic year, which would make them eligible for, next football season, there might be some more late movement here in terms of adding guys on the back end and flips and, not having to pull a scholarship later, drop somebody and just say, all right, maybe this is the agreement at first. Can you make this work? Because this is where we are now, because we want to keep adding talent to this roster.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think there's so many names that we could throw out, but I think it's just like you said, you're basically alluding to the principle of it, where you can it really adds fuel to the fire later in the process. And in fairness, you have to look at it from the other side with Washington, where you got to imagine some other schools are going to want to try and poach Chris Lawson. They're going to want to try, think about Arizona State, like those schools are still going to be pushing. And so, hey, it goes both ways. But I do think it is important to kind of, remember that nothing necessarily changes. Like, it kind of just adds an interesting wrinkle, I think, into the class more so than anything else. Like, how many extra guys will they get out of this? What do we say? 3 or 4? Maybe 5. What's the over under? 3.5, 3.5 over under. And again, both arguments could be made. You can go, 3 or 4 or 5. But I don't think this is it's more or less, it's an evolution that the sport needed to have, but I'm just more curious how it's actually going to come to like how many schools are going to be able to, backload talent, maybe add a couple of gray shirts into the mix where you can bring guys in throughout the process going into camps and stuff like that, where you're always evolving the roster. Again, similar to like an NFL team where the transactions never stop in the NFL. There's guys getting cut on a random Tuesday in the middle of February, and there's guys getting, signed in, November that end up, being Hall of Famers. So it never actually makes sense, but that's always why you're evaluating talent. And so I'm not sure. I totally see your point, kind of adding a player the caliber to Tagoa'i with this move, but I think more so it kind of creates like a, like you said earlier, where it's like 90-10, maybe where it's like a, 80, 10, 10, where you kind of divide it up, where 10 transfers and then 10, for walk-ons or old school walk-ons and things like that. Where I know it's basketball, but John Calipari in Arkansas wants to, have about 6 or 7 guys in his rotation, and the last 5 guys have that be what used to be walk-ons now on full-ride scholarships. And so it's like, hey, we're going to basically reward guys that we view as walk-ons with a scholarship, so we don't have 13 full-ride dudes, if you will. So that's, again, almost the reason why I say that is to say, like, maybe you don't have a Tagoa'i, but you have a guy who ends up developing. Think of like a Joe Tryon, or, again, obviously Joe ended up being worthy of a scholarship, But a player like that, we're like, hey, you know what? He only has 1 or 2 offers. We're not totally sure what's going to happen. So we'll give you a half scholarship or do X, Y, and Z with you, but we still want you, and we can kick it up. And I think that's the other thing is I believe you can kick it up to a full ride, the following year if because scholarships are on a year-by-year basis. You're not signing a 4-year deal for a half scholarship each year.
Right.
You should be able to negotiate, hey, if I outperform my rookie contract, I should be able to get a little bit more in my bonus, do I not? So there's all these different things that are going to have to come into play. And I'll be really curious to hear from Jedd Fisch how he thinks about, what he's going to do with this, because there's all these resources that we talk about at Washington, but at the same point, you kind of got to maybe not burn out all the resources, especially right away. Like, leave some of the coffer, add a couple of walk-ons that would not have gotten a scholarship normally that get a half scholarship, and see how that works out. And then use the same process with some JUCO guys where, hey, we'll pay for your college. You use NIL for X, Y, and Z for your, food, et cetera, whatever you want to spend. That, I think, is more so the realistic path than, hey, we're going to now add, 5 or 6 5-stars added on because we now have more room, and we're just going to throw a bunch of resources to see if we can just stack even more elite talent. It's a great theory. I just don't know necessarily if it's the best for Washington.
So I certainly hear where you're going with that, but this is the reason I brought it up. It's because, like I said earlier, they have those guys already, in my opinion. They have the guys that need a year or 2 to develop. They have the under the radar guys that didn't have a ton of offers. And with the way that it just still seems like they're pushing for the top end talent. Like one name that we haven't mentioned on the show yet is Phillip Bell. And Phillip Bell still seems to be interested in Washington, according to a new report from Adam Gorney, where, if you're still pushing for guys like that, it makes it easier with some of these back end, these back end guys that are already there. Like a Lowen Coleman Brusa, like a Victor Sanchez Hernandez, like a Desmond Roebuck at wide receiver, where it's still easy enough to renegotiate is really the only word to use there, but it's still easy enough to have that conversation and say it's because, in the olden days of, yesteryear in 2023, even at this point, it's still, we don't have a spot for you anymore. That's what it was. It's not that anymore. And that's why I'm bringing up these high profile examples, because this class is stacked with the development types already. And we know that this is what they want to do. We know they want to add these top tier guys on there. Well, that's why we, spent so much time on our respective websites writing and on the show talking about Ladarian Clardy. That's why we spent so much time talking about Dylan Robinson leading up his commitment to Chris Lawson, all these guys, because we know that's what they want. We know they want those guys that can come in and play right away and still have guys sit behind them and develop. And, if they work out, awesome. Like that's why I'm, such a huge fan of Lowen Coleman Brusa, of Dominic McCone, because all the tools are there. They're not ready to play as freshmen. Dylan Robinson is ready to play as a freshman. Like, looking around at some of these other guys that are uncommitted, Ladarian Clardy is ready to play as a freshman. Jerome Myles, who, obviously we'll see how that recruitment works out. Andrew Marsh, those guys are ready to play as freshmen. And that's what Jedd Fisch wants. We know that they have the guys to develop, but we want to see more of that top end talent. And I know that's, a big thing that I'm sure you've heard from the everydayers like I have, is they want to see more of those blue chip top end guys, which is why I wanted to make that example.
No, you're not wrong. I'm the same Gorney that said, "Oh, the Bodie's in Washington." Just kind of asked that question. Anyways, but I just had to get that in there. The one name. So if we can maybe marry these 2 points together, the name we're hitting on is Cormani McClain. Now, I say that as I'm not saying Washington goes and gets Cormani McClain, but look at the situation that he was in, where he ends up leaving Colorado, goes and walks. What I'm saying is, it allows you.
I was thinking about this differently. No, I see where you're going. Okay.
Where it allows you to take guys and say, hey, you know what? We'll give you a chance. It's not going to be a full scholarship, like you were saying earlier. We would have to drop somebody else for you earlier. Now, no, we're not going to drop anybody. We're not going to give you the keys to the kingdom, but we're going to give you a chance, and you can earn your way up. I think that could be a way. And similar to guys where, again, I'm not obviously certain guys more so do not deserve a second chance than potentially others. But there's other, stories that you'll hear about where, or maybe where like Maximus Street, where before, going to Washington, maybe he gets like a half scholarship somewhere else and just, hey, you know what? I'm trying to get back into football and let me figure it out. And oh, wow, this guy can really play. Now here's your full scholarship. Cool. It allows just a natural progression of sorts and a second avenue for guys that whether you're either an elite talent or you're an underrated guy, everybody can use this path. And so, again, that could go, the example that I initially gave could go several different ways, but that's where I'm trying to go.
Right. So I certainly see where you're going with that. That definitely makes a lot more sense because the reason that we wanted to make sure we spent a good amount of time on this is that this is going to be really different in all four corners of the country at every single school, where what works for Jedd Fisch at Washington might not be what works for Lincoln Riley at USC. It might not be what works for Ryan Day at Ohio State. It might not be what works for Kirby Smart at Georgia. So we're going to see a whole lot of different approaches. And I just feel that the way Jedd has chosen to structure his team, where it's, we're going to go very, very, very heavily on the high school ranks, where, of course, you want to get as many Dylan Robinsons and Cedric Rainey Sales and Chris Lawsons and Champ Telele's as you possibly can, and supplement them with, top end 3-star talent like Deji Jose, like, so many other names in this class. And so on top of that, you want to build on the back end. You want to build on those guys at the very bottom of, the recruiting rankings that are certainly somewhat underrated in my opinion. And it's about finding a way to balance all three of those things out in what Jedd wants, in my opinion. And I think this should work out really, really well for him because there are so many different ways that he can just construct this roster now, where it's, we know we want these blue chip guys to play right away. We want these guys to develop for a year or two. And we're going to bring, some of these guys in the middle into camp. And if they exceed expectations and they play really well right away, awesome. They're going to get some time on the field. If not, that's okay. We can give him a year or two to develop. And, he supplements it here and there from the transfer portal. But I think this is going to work out really well for him. And Lars, something that hasn't worked out for the Huskies very well early on is they didn't have any honorees on the preseason All Big Ten team. So this is something that you and I discussed the other day, and we got some really awesome feedback from the everydayers when we talked about Washington being a little bit underrated. And in terms of, just where they were in the Big Ten media poll. I think that it shows up more here than it does in that, because there are guys that I certainly believe deserve some recognition. Carson Bruener is the very first name that comes to mind, in my opinion. But having no guys on the roster, on this all Big Ten team, I feel like that's a little extreme.
It is, but also I again, this is what we said on the show, where we have a little bit more knowledge than most of the other fan bases, and certainly in the Big Ten, given that the only teams that know the Washington, Michigan State, maybe Ohio State, depending on how far you go back, right? There's not a lot of familiarity with this program, so it's kind of hard to truly assess. And then you also have to look at some of those schools in the Big Ten with Ohio State, with there's several other, even Michigan State with A. Childs and Jonathan Smith now. There's plenty of options to go around, and I'm just saying this to offer the other side of the coin. Obviously, for sure, you because you look at it. Well, Ephesians Prize Talk. We personally would put Denzel Boston in that mix, but
I put Jeremiah Hunter in that mix too.
Jeremiah Hunter, Kamren Fabiculanan. You can start going down the list of guys who could potentially be in, but also then you do have to kind of think of, and maybe even Will Rogers to an extent, Jonah Coleman with like a word, maybe potentially, those sort of deals. But other than that, there's not a ton of guys like I love the offensive line guys as people, but I don't think any of them are going to be like, hey, where's my preseason, second team all Big Ten, on. I think
Drew Ezekiel will be on the list by the end of the year.
Exactly. And I think that's more so where this conversation needs to go. It's you're coming into the season as a mystery, but there's a lot of potential. Justin Harrington, Cam Broussard could easily make second or third team. There's a lot of guys on this team. Zach Durfee, Sebastian Valdez, Deshaun Lynch, depending on whatever position he plays. There's so many guys. Maybe even one of the other quarterbacks, opposite of Price, like Elijah or that. One of those, somebody, there's a lot of guys with talent on the team. But it's hard to truly say, hey, you know what? these guys could actually be the best of the best. They might be good, right? And I don't think it's necessarily it's for an omission than like, oh, Washington has like the worst running back room and the worst receiver room and the worst offensive. That's not what these polls are saying. It's why Washington was ranked, 9th or 10th, depending on where records ranks. And I think it's kind of symbolic of, you know what? You got 4 winnable games and you got 4 very losable games. What you do with those in the middle is up to you. And I think that's what's really going to decide the season. I mean, the season's going to be decided before the month of November even starts. That's the takeaway. So, and that's why you're gonna have to wait to see how all this comes together first.
I couldn't agree with you more there. Something just hit me while we were having this conversation. There are 18 teams in this conference, and like that's just it's wild to think about that, and like it makes your argument even more fair. I just think that just having nobody is a little extreme. Where, again, Carson Bruener is the one name that I want to bring up with what he did at the end of the season last year. And how do you not expect him to build on that? Because it's not like that was the first time we've seen him either. Like when he was, starting at the end of 2021, he was equally impressive. It's one of those things where it's just like we've seen a fairly large sample size from him especially, but nobody really is just kind of where I kept coming back to. And it's just wild to think about this in terms of there are 17 other teams in this conference now. And it's just conference realignment, this whole thing. I need to stop myself before I just go down this rabbit hole that'll have everybody's head spinning. But it's crazy to think about it in that light. And that's why I'm kind of in the same terms of like, you couldn't find one to make sure that all teams have somebody. It's not an all-star game in the MLB sort of format, but there certainly are a couple of guys that I think deserve recognition now based on where they've been previously. Like Cam Fab is another one who played really well last year. Yeah, he got hurt, but played really well last year and certainly deserves some recognition.
You're not wrong, but I would also say I don't know how many of the guys that transferred out of Washington have also made respective preseason lists either. So it could just be a general indictment on, we heard it from Booger when, can Washington play big boy football? Well, they play nice football, and I'm not going down that road, but I'm just saying, like, the perception of Washington. I mean, your point. Okay, here's a perfect example. Will Rogers. Are there 6 quarterbacks in the Big Ten right now better than Will Rogers?
No.
And that's, I think, the point. Is he the number 1, 2, or 3 guy? Probably not. But we don't know what Will Howard is going to look like at Ohio State. We don't know what A.J. House is going to look like, albeit going back with Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, now in the Big Ten. There's a lot of moving pieces with this. And so I think Washington doesn't have it's crazy to say coming off a national championship, but it's because here's the thing. If Penix was a junior last season and ran it back, different discussion. If Roger came back, different discussion. If Rome and those guys this was 23 or 22 and they were running it back, much different story. You're talking about first team, second team, second team. So be it. Everybody that's coming back this season with the aside from the few transfers they got in, don't necessarily have a full season of production. Drew has a party on a level, kind of doesn't even have a full season of, he has experience, but as a true, 13, 14 game right tackle, it's not there. It's not even there. Now, it will become that, and we both agree that it will become that, similar to Jonah Coleman being a 1,000-yard rusher, Cam Davis getting back to his form. There's plenty of potential there, but that's a participation trophy, not a preseason award. And again, I say that with all due respect, right? Because again, I'm prefacing it by saying there's probably going to be a decent, at least a half dozen guys that make the postseason all Big Ten teams. Again, with everybody in the Big Ten doesn't actually do preseason rankings or polls, so these are other media outlets. We could do our own Big Ten poll and have Washington be on the first and second team, and it would. I'm not saying it would carry equal weight, but I'm just saying it serves the same representative purpose. Where basically that's what we're here to do, right? Why is Washington not here? Okay, well, you know what? They're making some good sense, but there is potential to have a significant number of guys. Kaliki Latu, if he has a big season. Quentin Moore, if he has a big season. There's so many guys. Giles Jackson comes back and has a resurrection season in the Big Ten. There's so many guys that you could say that about. the one award Washington will definitely be up for this year, could potentially be comeback player of the year. So that's a safe bet. But other than that, there's nobody, and even then, it's more or less emerging player, not even comeback player. So there's all the pieces are there, but I can see why there's only, Carson Bruener getting a respectful nod like this, and everybody else is being omitted.
Some very good points made from you right there. Now, Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Before we get out of here, we got to remind all our everydayers, all our viewers, we really do appreciate, about the brand new Locked On Huskies Insider Program. We've attached the link for it down in the description of this video. All you're going to do is click that. We don't need very much from it. You'll be able to text with us. We're going to give you access to our Google Drive where we're putting in all the interviews that we have for the spring practice right now. We're going to keep updating that through the fall in games as well. And that's going to be exclusive. You're not going to find those anywhere else. I haven't seen anybody else putting out all the interviews like we are. You'll be able to chat with us one-on-one. We're going to give you all our first takeaways before we get to our respective websites. Before we jump on this show, before we record, we are going to be putting some thoughts that you won't find anywhere else, only on our Locked On Huskies Insider Program. Then, it just gives you so many opportunities to text with us, ask us questions. We're going to do exclusive videos for our insiders only. It's going to be so much fun. It is for only $4.99 a month after a 2-week free trial. And if you text with the promo code GODOGS, gives you 50% off for your first 2 months. It's going to be so much fun. You're going to absolutely love it. And with that being said, thank you for tuning in. We really do appreciate all your support. And the best way to make sure you're up to date on everything else that we're putting out there is to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. We got so much more fun stuff coming. So make sure you like the video, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you need questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below. If you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.